In the late 90s, there were a few wrestlers who jumped back and forth between WWE and WCW. Jeff Jarrett, X-Pac and the British Bulldog are names that easily come to mind. But one wrestler made one of the stranger leaps. If you watch an ECW show from mid-99, chances are you might see a run-in or a walk-in by, of all people, Sid. The master and ruler of the world would only have a handful of matches in ECW, but would make more appearances where he would arrive, usually among some ongoing carnage, raise hell and leave. Some know him as the WWF's Psycho Sid, others as WCW's Sid Vicious, but ECW fans would know the man as just Sid. In this video, we'll look at how and why he went to ECW, and we'll go through all of his television and pay-per-view appearances, and how his run ended. We'll also look at what happened behind the scenes, and why there might have been a little controversy. Sid would make his ECW debut on January 10th, 99, at the Guilty as Charged pay-per-view in Kissimmee, Florida. John Kronus, former member of the Eliminators with Perry Saturn, and a little unhinged looking, heads to the ring seemingly without an opponent. Out walks Jeff Jones, former ECW referee, who Joey Styles is surprised to see wearing a judge's outfit. Jones makes a couple of topical references to Bill Clinton and O.J. Simpson because 1990s, proclaiming them to be both guilty as charged. Because, well, the show is called that. The crowd, by the way, has no idea what to make of any of this, with some visibly bored. It turns out that Jones has more of a point to get to, though, as he turns his attention to Kronus. Jeff noted that a week earlier, Kronus had attacked him in the ring, hitting him with a 450 splash. And for that, he is guilty as charged. Kronus would then be introduced to Jones's new executioner as Sid walked out to the ring. What follows next is a short but brutal affair, as Sid immediately chokeslams Kronus out of the ring and through a table. After a couple of shots from a chair, two being unprotected to the head mind, Sid throws him back in the ring and finishes things with a powerbomb, ending the match at about a minute and a half. As you might imagine, while watching lots of ECW for this video, I saw many powerbombs by Sid, and so that's why I thought we'd have a little fun and have, that's right, a powerbomb counter. In an interesting moment, Jones celebrates with Sid while very much keeping his distance, implying that not even he is quite safe. Joey Styles even ends with the line, "I've got a sickly feeling that Jones, judge or not, can't control Sid." So why was Sid there, and what led to him arriving in ECW? The last time a national audience had seen Sid would be a year and a half earlier. In June 97, Sid wrestled his last match for the WWF, where he would defeat Owen Hart on Raw. During the match, Jim Neidhart would interfere to help Owen, but would be thwarted by Ken Shamrock, allowing Sid to win. This would be what became Sid's final WWE match, or it would have been had he not had one more 15 years later in June 2012. Sid would have a brief match in the lead up to the 1000th episode of Raw, where he would make short work of Heath Slater. This would end up being one of the last matches Sid would ever have. Sid's final appearance in 97 would take place a month later, where he would stand beside Ken Shamrock, The Patriot, Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels against the Hart Foundation, but for Sid nothing more would come of this. Sid would leave the WWF, according to every source I've seen, to get neck surgery. He would wrestle a few indie matches through 1998, wrestling primarily in the Northeast, but also in Memphis, against former WWF opponents such as Mabel and King Kong Bundy. But what of Sid's time in ECW? On January 16th, the episode of Hardcore TV after Guilty as Charged, most of the show was highlights from the pay-per-view. They showed Sid's match again in full, and a backstage interview with Jeff Jones. The man in the judge outfit doesn't say all that much of note, just reminding everyone that Sid is the most intense man in wrestling, as if that needed a reminder by the way, and that he's here to be Jones's executioner. What's more interesting though is Joey Styles' setup for the interview. Is this an accident waiting to happen or what? Jones is a schmuck. How long until Sid realises that this kid is nothing more than a parasitic putz and a lying leech? I guess we're not being misled as to where this is eventually going. On the following week's episode, Sid makes his official television debut. This was part of the House Party 99 event. that occurred on January 16th, which also featured the return of the Public Enemy after being in WCW, but before their disastrous WWF run. We start the episode with Skull Von Crush heading to the ring, who would later become known in WCW as Big Vito of the Mamalukes, and briefly on SmackDown as Vito, that bloke wearing a dress. Instead of an opponent though, Judge Jeff Jones heads to the ring, with Styles exclaiming that the rumours must be true, and Sid wasn't just here as a one-time shot at the pay-per-view. Jones tells Crush that he is guilty as charged for trespassing in his ring, and out walks the hired gun, Sid. All in capitals now. Sid enters the ECW arena to a massive response from the crowd, and again makes short work of his victim, choke-slamming him out of the ring through a table, and finishing him with a powerbomb. Post-match, the fans loudly chant one more time, and Sid obliges with another powerbomb, from which Crush bounces off the mat. One final thing to note about this is that according to the Wrestling Observer, a lot of the show was to stall for time, as they took an intermission which they normally don't do, did an angle where the Dudleys said Public Enemy wasn't there and they were leaving, and then added a match with John Kronus over Ulf Herman, and an angle with Bill Wilds, because Sid missed his flight and didn't arrive at the airport until close to 11 PM. It's worth noting at this point that from the very time Sid arrived in ECW, Dave Meltzer was predicting that he would no-show, and throughout the time we're going to talk about in this video, there are cases of him no-showing indies. So at what point will Sid stop making his dates? That's this Dave Meltzer, by the way. Well renowned for his organisation, that bloke. The next time Sid would appear in ECW would be Hardcore TV on February 6th, this time not for a match though. We join a match in progress, pitting Roadkill against Chris Chetty, where Roadkill misses an elbow drop from the top rope and seems to be hurt. Instead of going for the kill, Chetty hesitates, and this draws the ire of the judge, who heads to the ring while scolding Chetty for showing mercy. I don't think that's how judges usually work. By this time though, ECW fans all knew what it meant when Judge Jeff Jones appeared. Jones tells Chetty that for the crime of showing mercy, his sentence is execution, and again walks out Sid. Bizarrely though, as Sid walks to the ring, he can be heard telling the camera, "Let me tell you something. There's a little miscommunication out here. For those who don't know it, I really don't enjoy this." Well, you could have fooled me by the way Sid soaks up the adulation from the ECW fans. Joey Styles explains that Sid sees this as just a job, as he goes ahead and destroys Chris Chetty. He even hits the wounded Roadkill, who is on the apron, before laying Chetty out with a huge powerbomb. He slams Roadkill off the apron through a table, and then finishes Chetty with 2 powerbombs. Gone is any pretense that Sid is doing this out of any sense of justice, as he at one point gleefully runs around the ring, surveying Chetty's prone body. The next week's episode opens up with fan cam footage of Sid's next appearance. He interrupts a match seemingly in progress, this time going after the one-man gang, who gets a few punches in, more than anybody has yet. Sid hits the one-man gang with a huge body slam, and then chokeslams Rod Price, whose crime also appears to be that he happened to be in the ring. Sid finally helps up Skull Von Crush, and obliges the fans, who are loudly chanting "F*** him up," hitting him with a powerbomb. If you think I'm being brief on this one, that's because what we're shown is pretty short, and leads into the ECW opening video. On February 20th, ECW would air Sid's next Rampage. We're again joining a match in progress, where Steve Corino, still a comedy goof at this point, hits John Kronus with a powerbomb. As if on cue, Judge Jeff Jones walks out, ready to declare Corino guilty of gimmick infringement. Jones tells Steve, "You don't use that move around here. That move belongs to the master." And Sid comes out in the Manhattan Center. Joey Styles even notes that the last time Sid was in New York, he destroyed the Heartbreak Kid, referring to Sid beating Shawn Michaels for the WWF title at Survivor Series 96 in Madison Square Garden. Initially, this looks like another of Sid's beatdowns, with him laying to waste both Corino and Kronus with chokeslams and powerbombs. He even polls the fans on who they want to receive a second, which Corino wins. or probably more accurately, loses. There is a moment where Sid turns around and is startled by Jones standing behind him, and for a second it looks like he might turn on his handler. But this doesn't happen, as Sid finishes the attack on Cronus and Carino. As Sid leaves, the ECW intro airs, teasing that Sid will be at the next pay-per-view, living dangerously. The next time Sid would appear live on an ECW broadcast would be a month later at the pay-per-view. You could argue from everything I've said about his ECW run so far, that Sid has not really been given much of a challenge so far. But on March 21st, 1999, from Asbury Park, New Jersey, Sid would face his toughest opponents yet. Around halfway through the event, the Dudley Boys would essentially hijack the pay-per-view, coming in to attack New Jack, and then issuing an open challenge to any two men brave enough to face them. Nova and Spike Dudley would answer the call, but it would not go well for them. Spike would be thrown into the crowd and body surfed around the venue by the fans, and Nova would get a beating from Bubba Ray and Devon. The Dudleys would even attack ring announcer Bob Ortiz, hitting him with a 3D after he tried to stop them beating on Nova anymore. Bubba gets back on the microphone and claims that there's nobody left to face them. He asks, is there no man tough enough to face them? And out walks Judge Jeff Jones, and you know what that means. Jones arrives pushing a stretcher to the ring and calls out Sid. Sid receives a massive cheer from the ECW fans as he walks to the ring, seemingly offended by Bubba's claim that there's no man tough enough to face them. ECW's most decorated tag team become the only people we've seen yet to get real offense in on Sid, and they beat him down to the mat. Despite this, Sid gets back up to his feet pretty quickly and delivers a chokeslam to both Dudleys at the same time. Sid hits Devon with a powerbomb and throws him on the stretcher, while Spike, who's made it back to ringside, goes after Bubba. Spike hits Bubba with the acid drop, the move that would later be known as the Dudley Dog in WWE, and a referee enters so that Spike can pin Bubba. This officially gets listed as a victory for Sid and Spike. Oblivious to the fact that Sid teams with no one, Spike stays in the ring long enough to receive a powerbomb from Sid, and another off the entrance ramp through a table. While the fans in the building were clearly into seeing Sid destroy whoever was put in front of him, what did the newsletters think? In the PW Torch, Wade Keller wasn't too thrilled by Sid in ECW 99, going as far as to call the main eventers of the roster stale. In March he would write of Sid's involvement, the fact that ECW is looking at Sid to give them some much needed star power shows how far they've distanced themselves from their original approach. Sid gets good pops from the ECW crowds, and he may be an important cog in keeping ECW afloat, but he goes against everything Joey Styles preached about every week during ECW's early days. With Shane Douglas, Taz and the Dudleys leaving the promotion later in the year, this might soon be tested. On the following week's Hardcore TV, Sid would interrupt a tag team match in progress. We'd join Nova trying to protect his potentially injured partner Chris Chetty from Skull One Crush and Rod Price. Jeff Jones runs out with a stretcher and calls out Sid, who lays absolute waste to all four men with multiple powerbombs. If you think I'm rushing through this one, it's because so did ECW, as Sid effectively destroys these four men in record time. Aside from the stretcher that was introduced at the pay-per-view, these segments are all very similar, especially for poor Big Vito, who's taken I think more powerbombs than anyone so far. Sid wouldn't appear again for over a month. In the April 5th edition of the Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer noted that on a weekend run of March 25th, 26th and 27th ECW shows, none of which Sid was booked on, the biggest negative, or positive depending on how you look at it, is that in all three cities, the crowd was constantly chanting for Sid in every match. It's as if the people are now coming to see the Sid running, and he wasn't booked on any of these shows, although there was some advertising out for him to appear in Freeport. Every time a wrestler got on the mic to issue a challenge, the place would go nuts chanting for Sid to come out and shut him up. In the next week's Observer, Dave would report on cracks beginning to show between Sid and ECW, as he would no-show the April 3rd event, CyberSlam. Dave would write he missed his first flight, then upgraded his second flight to first class, and then didn't get on the flight. ECW announced that he missed his plane. The next day, when asked by an indie intermediary about what happened, Sid first claimed that he had a cold, but later in the conversation said that he just didn't feel like going. Paul Heyman said he talked to Sid the next day, and Sid said he no-showed to get Heyman's attention because he wanted the book. And Heyman said Sid is done and won't be brought back unless he posts an appearance bond that he would forfeit in the event of a no-show. In the next week's newsletter, Dave would note that Sid was, quote, still all over the pay-per-view commercials. In the May 3rd Observer newsletter, Dave would offer another explanation as to why Sid no-showed in April. One that feels a little more believable. Tommy Rogers and Sid, who were both working the weekend in the area for Mike O'Brien's Northeast Wrestling, showed up at the April 24th Queens shows to get settled on previously bounced checks. Sid was owed $6,000 and Rogers a much lesser amount, and both were paid off, although there ended up being a scene between Rogers and Paul Heyman over it. Sid was telling people that the reason he no-showed the ECW arena was because of bounced checks, and also claimed that Heyman never told him about the date, and never received plane tickets for the show. The first half of the story was clearly true, since there was a bad check. The second half isn't, as not only was he sent a ticket, but also changed his ticket before not getting on the plane. On the May 8th episode of Hardcore TV, presumably because Sid was gone from ECW, Judge Jeff Jones appears to curiously have a new role. He's seen outside the building, interviewing ECW World Champion Taz. After ending the interview, Taz proceeds to threaten Jones with the Taz mission, before throwing him in the back of his car, and walking directly to the ring. You might think from everything we've talked about so far, that Sid might want some justice from the ECW World Champion, but this never gets addressed ever again. Sid's next appearance would come at the next pay-per-view, Hardcore Heaven. On May 16th, 1999, from Poughkeepsie, New York, Sid would again find himself stepping up to an Impact player in ECW. Just Incredible heads to the ring for his semi-main event with Shane Douglas, who isn't at the building. Justin gets on the microphone and lists the names that he has, according to him, sent packing out of ECW. Justin exclaims, "I'm a one-man crime spree. I'm guiltier than OJ, and there ain't no jury, and there definitely ain't no justice system that can sentence me to the electric chair." These comments feel like he's asking for it a bit too on the nose, and Judge Jeff Jones seemed to agree, as these comments are his cue to walk out and introduce Sid. Curiously though, as Sid walks to the ring, Joey Styles notes that we thought we'd seen the last of Sid. With referee Jim Molyneux already in the ring, this becomes an official match, or if you prefer to call it, a few minutes of Sid mauling another wrestler. When Sid attempts to powerbomb Justin, his lackey Jason Knight makes the save, taking the move for his troubles. This allows Justin to attack Sid with his cane, a weapon he started using as a reminder to the fans that he had taken the Sandman out of ECW for the time being. Not only does Sid completely no-sell the cane, but chokeslams Justin with the weapon still in his hand. When Sid tries to powerbomb Justin again, Lance Storm interferes, and the match is thrown out by the referee as a no contest. A very rare action in ECW, but more on that in a minute. The Impact players continue to attack Sid, even attempting to put him through a table, which draws out Sabu, who has a score to settle with Lance and Justin. He tries to put Sid and Justin through a table, with a dive off the top rope, but Lance pulls Justin away, leaving Sid to take the move, as Sabu is carried away by security, as he isn't supposed to be in the building because of the storyline he's currently in. This leaves Jeff Jones and a rather humiliated Sid. Just like Joey Styles predicted in January, Sid finally snaps and attacks Jones, laying him out with 2 powerbombs before he leaves. If that whole Hardcore Heaven segment sounds like chaos, it absolutely came across that way to view as well. It turns out there might have been a reason for this. Well, a few reasons actually. The Wrestling Observer from the week of Hardcore Heaven tells us that Justin Credible was scheduled to work either Shane Douglas or Sabu at the event, but neither was possible for different reasons. Shane was on his way out of the company on extremely bad terms, while Sabu was part of a storyline where he was banned from competing by the State Athletic Commission. Part of that story was built around Sabu needing jaw surgery, but Sabu being Sabu, and ECW being ECW, I don't know how true that is. For what it's worth though, the Wrestling Observer does mention in the April 12, 1999 edition that Sabu's, quote, mouth was still a mess, so there may have been some truth to this. Dave Meltzer details that, as literally a last-minute plan, Heyman called Sid Udy at 11:30 PM the night before the show to replace Douglas. Problem number 2 comes in here though, as Paul couldn't book Sid to dominantly destroy Justin, as he was Paul's prospective next top heel to replace Shane Douglas. As Dave also noted, Justin wasn't getting over quite like Heyman wanted, and so being squashed by Sid wouldn't exactly help matters. Paul Heyman had another issue, in that reps from Showtime, MTV and TNN were backstage, and so he felt he couldn't do anything that might upset the fans. Heyman said he never suggested Sid doing a job for Credible, claiming it was the fear of a negative audience reaction to Sid losing a 2-minute match, and didn't want the people he was trying to do business with to hear chants of bull or refund. Dave goes on to note that the DQ finish probably upset the fans anyway, since they were never really done in ECW, and it definitely came across as a little strange to watch. Dave finally notes that there was never a contract with Sid, just a series of one-shot appearances, but Paul was talking about bringing Sid in to discuss a longer arrangement at the May 22nd TV taping. In the following week's newsletter, Dave would note that July's Heatwave pay-per-view may include a match between Sid and Sabu, possibly with Justin Credible involved, but this would never take place. The show on May 22nd from Detroit would end up being Sid's final appearance for ECW, at the end of the June 12th episode of Hardcore TV, but taped in May. Sid would walk to the ring following a confrontation between Justin Credible and Sabu, following on from their fight at the pay-per-view. While both men are being held back by security, Sid ominously appears from backstage, and the show goes off the air. Sid would then wrestle a 2-minute no contest with Rod Price, but the match wouldn't air on television. It's fair to say then that Sid would be done with ECW. After the no contest with Rod Price wouldn't air on TV, it's fair to say that Sid would be done on ECW, as the day after his final televised appearance for the company aired, he would make his surprise return to WCW, running in on the main event of the Great American Bash. Sid's return to WCW was not without controversy though, as it appeared that nobody had informed Arn Anderson that Sid would be back. Sid had previously left the company in disgrace in '93 because of an altercation with Arn on a European tour, which involved Sid stabbing Arn with scissors. This fight would later be referenced by Eric Bischoff on a 2000 episode of Nitro, where Eric would callously quip at Sid, "What's the matter, Sid? Not got your scissors?" I began to write this video following the news of Sid's passing on August 26, 2024. It wasn't meant as an obituary, but a look at one chapter in the long and in many ways dramatic career of Sid. Now before I end the video, there's one more thing I wanted to get to that you might well have clocked as you watch this. That Sid was wearing denim jeans throughout most of it, his trademark black trunks and boots not to be seen. If you were wondering why like I was, an answer was provided on Twitter by Lance Storm, who said of Sid, he would show up to the building in jeans and a t-shirt. He'd take the shirt off, pull on his elbow neoprene, and head to the ring. When he got to the back, he'd take off the elbow gimmick, put his shirt back on, and leave. Lance Storm's final words were, "Sid ruled." Sid's time in ECW was chaotic, short-lived, but extreme no doubt. This is how I choose to remember Sid. Well, this and that Survivor Series match with Shawn Michaels, that was amazing. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.